first off, we're going to start with final action, SB 64. We will shoot it over to the reviser for a quick explainer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 64 is the bill that adjusts the Capers Act statutory references, deals with some administrative appeal timing issues, and updates provisions to do some compliance with federal Internal Revenue Code changes.
Thank you for that explanation. Committee, is there any discussion? Seeing none, I do have an amendment. Surprise. And while that amendment is getting sent out, it is very simple. I am changing the enactment date from the statute book to the register. Are there any questions from the committee on the amendment as it's getting sent out? Sent out. Should be in your inboxes. Everybody had a chance to review the amendment. That wishes to review the amendment. It doesn't look like Representative White is. Yeah. It's a good amendment. I need a second on my amendment. Representative White seconds it. That's how good it is. All right, does anybody object to moving forward with voting on the amendment? Seeing no objection, all those in favor, aye? All opposed? No. Would you like your revote recorded? Okay, motion passes. We're back on the bill. Do I have a motion to pass out SB 64?
Move to pass out SB 64 as amended.
Do I have a second? Representative Roser seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. We will now turn our attention. Coach would like his affirmative vote recorded. We now turn our attention to SB 139. Go back to the reviser for a quick explainer.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 139 is the bill that updates some definitions, terms, conditions, and other items in the state banking code.
Committee, any questions for the reviser? Seeing none, any discussion? Seeing none, any amendments? I do have an amendment, As that's getting sent out, it's going to be the same as the previous amendment. We are changing the enactment date from the statute book to the register. It's out? Perfect. Just a copy of the other one. Is that a second? It's a question. Yes, Representative Bohai.
So what is the actual time difference there?
The register is is it a weekly Kansas newspaper? Bi-weekly? So we'll say March to July 1.
Thank you.
Please don't pull what I pull on Representative Francis and Transportation Committee. Any further questions on my amendment? Seeing none, I do need a second. Second by Vice Chair Steens. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
All opposed? No. Oh, no. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. We're back on the bill. Do I have any further discussion on SB 139? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion. Representative Roser.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to pass this out of committee as amended favorably.
Vice Chair Steens.
Second.
Second. Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye? All opposed? Motion passes. Coach would like his affirmative vote recorded again. Thank you for your hard work on all that, committee. We will now turn our attention to an informational briefing we have lined up today on the Kansas Link Deposit Loan Program. One second here. Just a little background. Last year, we had some discussions during the interim on the Link Deposit Loan Program. I did introduce some legislation as I look for the number 2281 was introduced this year. That was not heard in committee. It was not blessed, so it is dead for the session. But I wanted to give an overview because this is something that we will be working on further this year and in the off session to have some legislation ready for next year. But I wanted to give a committee a good update on it. So first up, we're going to call Alex Orrell with the Kansas Bankers Association. Alex, welcome to committee, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Making this a daily occurrence these last few weeks. You guys get to hear from me a lot more than you probably like to. Good morning, Alex Orrell, for the record, Senior Vice President, Government Relations for the Kansas Bankers Association. You'll see in my testimony about being a proponent for HB 2281, but then a general linked deposit loan overview. First, I'll state on HB 2281, that's just a bill work in progress. There's a lot of things going on, conversations among stakeholders that have been going on since, frankly, for the last couple of years. I do want to thank the State Treasurer's Office for being here today. They are the experts on this, and they do a fantastic job. But the time has come to modernize these programs. And how linked deposit loan programs work is using the state idle funds, which this committee has seen many times this year regarding the other bill today, which is on GO today, and uses those state idle funds and to provide low-cost loans on certain projects across the state. Over the years, a little history, the first linked deposit loan, well, actually, let me back up before that, and how the mechanics of that work is bank or farm credit or credit unions are able to sign a certification agreement with the treasurer's office to pull down a deposit at a below market rate of 2% below market, and then they're able to lend those dollars back out for approved projects, whether it be housing, ag production, economic recovery, city utility recovery from a couple years ago. So it can be very flexible. Our current structure right now needs some work. When you look to the east, and I think we're going to have somebody here from the state, Missouri Treasurer's Office, they have MoBucks. Why not? Why can't we have CanBucks? So yes, did steal that from them. It was a great idea. But they recently enhanced their program from $800 million to $1.2 billion last year. So very successful, and our program, just shy of 200 million has been authorized. And I want to be very clear on the authorization versus appropriation. There's been sometimes confusion in the building regarding where these linked deposit loan and the funds, for instance, the housing fund has $60 million authorized to be used. It's not just a pot of money of $60 million sitting over there that can be used for an appropriation. So I just want to make that very clear because there is some confusion on that, and because it's not just sitting there, it's being used, it's being invested, and the state treasurer's doing a great job on that. But back to the history, the ag production program was started in July of 2000. It funded $50 million and it expanded to $55 million in 2001. On page 3 of my testimony, you'll see that for that program, only 81 current loans with a $15 million balance, with 40 million, almost 40 million, still available for those type of loans. The housing development program was created in 2008, offering up to 60 million. I believe at the time, 50% of those funds were dedicated to counties in southeast Kansas for natural disasters. I want to say floods. But that program hasn't been used since 2014. And then in April 2021, 2 more programs were created. The Kansas Extraordinary Utility Cost Loan Deposit Program, which is not really a deposit program. It's really working with the cities when they had the huge spike in natural gas costs from the freeze of 2021 when we were like negative 20 degrees. I think you guys remember that time. A lot of our cities' bills went through the roof on gas. So that was implemented to provide relief from there. Then also the Economic Recovery Deposit Program. That piece was actually passed in 2000 in a previous proposal. But it ultimately did end up getting vetoed that year. It was crazy COVID year. The legislature got shut down and we came back for a 24-hour session with no veto session. And I'm sure you've heard the stories of that session. I do believe if it was implemented earlier, before PPP, this was kind of an idea before PPP, it would have been utilized significantly. So I think it needs some work as well, because as you can see, there's only 11 million in the current balance and 48 million for funds available. A lot of conversations been going on in the past on why don't these work. I'll be candid. I think it's a multitude of factors, but one is the loan limits. I'll use ag production. The loan limit's $250,000. Can't really do much with $250,000 on that piece. Economic recovery. I mean, when you think of, I'll get the economic recovery right now. $250,000 for that one. FTE limitations of 100 and below. $1 million loan is still a small business loan. And I think some people kind of have wrapped their heads around that, these loan limits should be higher. Also, probably some of the terms and rates. I'll use the housing one in particular. The housing program allows for a 5-year note on housing or rehabilitation. That's not working 5 years or 20 years for adult care facilities. So that's probably part of the reasons why that program's not working either. And I think these are great ideas. They're great tools. All they need to do is be revamped. And I think we need to look to our friends to the east on how they've set up their program. Our program currently is set up in silos. Each one of these programs is 55 million, 60 million, et cetera. In Missouri, it's one big umbrella, and all the programs fall under that one big umbrella, and you can shift as the economy, as the market dictates and needs at that moment. So there's other programs out there. Maybe some of you guys have heard the city of Pittsburgh's idea, which is called SHIP, and it's a statewide housing incentive program. It would be like a statewide TIF district where a city can apply to the state to pull down a grant for a certain percentage of the value of that property. And then that city pays back the state on real property taxes over time. And I believe their proposal has a cap of 10% of the property, and the maximum amount of $30,000 is their proposal. That's an idea that I think could absolutely be incorporated in a modernization program. I know me and the chairman and others have talked about infrastructure for housing development as well, maybe having a program dedicated specifically to that piece. As well, maybe a retooled rehabilitation program as well. If we redo our structure and we set it up kind of more similarly to Missouri, where it's all under one umbrella and it's siloed, or instead of being siloed, you can come up with a lot of different types of programs. Missouri, I know you're going to hear from them, but they have alternative energy, they have an ag program, they have multifamily housing, local government programs. They got a lot more programs than we have, and we could do that too. But I will caution the committee that on the amount, you guys do have the ability to authorize a certain amount of funds to the PMIB. But as I've stated many, many times, the PMIB's function is liquidity, safety, and then return. So you're going to definitely need to consult with the state treasurer on how much of the PMIB funds can be even used for these programs. I do believe a cap is absolutely necessary, and there is one now. But an idea would be, 5% of the total fund, which is about $9 billion, depending on the month, could be used for these type of programs. That's roughly $450 million. And then a secondary cap as well on housing programs as well. A lot of talks about housing, but I think we also recognize the cost and the significant housing proposals that have been passed in previous years. It's probably good practice to put a cap on that. And making sure, and so an idea that's been floated around as well is 20% of the 5%, which would be roughly $90 million. Because you don't want all of those monies tied up in long-term loans, long-term liabilities. So a lot of these other programs are short-term loans, less than 10 years, or even the SHIP program, they show on a $20,000 deposit or a grant down in their area that's paid back. It'd take 5 to 6 years to pay back in real property taxes. So bottom line, I think this committee and this legislature is primed and ready to take a deep dive in this. And I would request, and up to the chairman, of course, that I think we have an interim day on this to really take a deep dive. There's so many other players. Yes, we're the financial, side of things, the banks. But, we've worked really closely with our realtors, our builders, our ag folks. I think a lot more people need to be at the table when looking at the modernization of these programs. And that's how the best stuff comes to the top. You keep stirring until we get the best idea. So I appreciate the chairman having this informational hearing, and I think we can put, or in the interim, put together a really good proposal for you all for next year to put this money back to work in Kansas as well, which is I know a major goal that you and I and many in the legislature share. So I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, Alex, I think we'll just go right in ahead of our presentation with the MOBUCS program with David Saucer, Director of Investments for the Missouri State Treasurer's Office. David, are you with us on WebEx?
Yes, I am. Can you all hear me?
We can. Welcome to committee, sir. It's not every day that we have our, we'll call it friends to the east of us here in Jayhawk land, but we do appreciate you taking the time to share your program with us today.
Well, good morning from Tiger Country. Do you guys have the presentation that I shared?
Yes, I believe we do, Rich, have the PowerPoint, yes.
Okay, great. Then I will just kind of go through the presentation. Please interrupt me with questions during the presentation, or we can just address any questions that you have at the end. I won't go into a lot of detail here, but as mentioned before, this is Missouri's Link Deposit Program. We label it as MoBucks. It's kind of a trendy or catchy phrase that people do remember. On slide 2, I was asked by Treasurer Malik to just kind of sit in on this informational session here, give you all a general overview of our program, and then of course address any questions that you all have. Slide 3, so what is MoBucks? There is some similarities to the program that you all have. We do partner with financial institutions throughout the state. We have about 120, 125 banking relationships, your commercial banks and so forth. We work with, the lenders throughout the state to provide, low cost funding for the borrowers, small businesses, farmers, etc. The way it's structured, it's a deposit. There is really no credit risk from the treasurer's perspective or the state's perspective because we deposit money at a bank at a below market interest rate or deposit rate in exchange for the bank being able to loan that money out to the end user, the borrower, at a below market rate. So in the end, the intent is to provide this low cost financing for farmers, small business owners, etc., to create jobs and stimulate the local or statewide economy. Moving on to page 4, gives you a highlight or a high-level overview of our eligible categories. As you can see here, it's small business, agriculture, multifamily, government entity, job enhancement, and renewable energy. The two popular programs right now are small businesses and agriculture, and then a distant third right now is multifamily. But over the last 3 or 4 years, the largest allocation within our program has been either small businesses or agriculture. Starting on page 5 just gives you some qualifications or eligibility requirements within each program. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. If you guys have some questions regarding any of these programs, of course I can address them now or down the road, but this just kind of gives you a high-level overview of each program and their requirements and how they're implemented. What we look at, the State Treasurer's Office of Missouri does a thorough due diligence on each of the borrowers. Our relationship is with the bank or the lending institution, so we don't interact with the borrower, but we request a variety of information from the banks on behalf of the borrower to do our own diligence work. So page 5 is small businesses. Page 6 is agriculture. Within agriculture, we actually have 2 different programs. And like the gentleman said earlier, all these categories are within one umbrella. We have, from the capital's perspective, the legislature has approved $1.2 billion can be allocated to this program. It's not an annual appropriation. It's dollars within the state treasurer's portfolio. So if you look at our portfolio and you see U.S. Treasuries, you see government agencies, GSE agencies, you see commercial paper, another line item within our portfolio is the MoBucks, the Link Deposit Program. So yes, we did recently get a cap increase from $800 million to $1.2 billion. That $400 million increase is an additional $400 million that the state legislature appropriated to the investment portfolio of the state. That money, as we continue to fund additional loans within the program, that money comes from elsewhere within our portfolio. So we have to continue to reallocate money as we approve additional loans. Getting back to agriculture, we have two different programs. There's the Beginning Farmer program, which farmers can utilize to actually acquire farmland. And then the more traditional one on page 7 is farming operation. You can take out loans, to purchase a new tractor, a new combine, purchase seed, just general operating expenses of the farm. As we're kind of kicking off planting season, there's a lot of need for funding around the state from our farmers. Slide 8 looks at multifamily, similar to ag. There are two different programs here. There's an owner option and then a developer option. They have their different requirements for each of those two categories. Page 9 looks at the developer. And then moving on to slide 10, these are less utilized throughout the program. Slide 10 looks at government entities. For example, like a local Parks and Rec of a city in southern Missouri wants to build a new park or a new activity center. They can utilize this program to construct new activity centers throughout their municipality. Slide 11 looks at alternative energy. Slide 12 just shows some important reminders about how we structure and calculate our interest penalties. If the money is not completely loaned out to a borrower. So, for example, with FCS, Farm Credit, they'll utilize our funding as a line of credit for the farmers. And if they take $100,000 from us and they're only loaning out $75,000 to a farmer, that additional $25,000 that's not loaned out, we are receiving a market rate of interest on those dollars, whereas the $75,000 that the borrower, the farmer in this case, has already taken into his or her own bank account, that money we calculate the below market interest rate on. Slide 13 looks at how we kind of calculate our interest rate. It's in line with what an average CD rate is. We actually use 3 different sources of an interest rate return. We look at CD rates throughout the state. We look at a similar treasury return. So if we're looking at a 1-year rate, we'll look at a 1-year CD, kind of average CD rate throughout the state. We'll look at the 1-year treasury and then the 1-year Federal Home Loan Bank rate. Do a blended return or blended rate calculation on that, and that's the market rate that's established. And then depending on where the market rate is, the state or the treasurer's office can actually reduce that rate by as much as 60%. We do have a 3% cap. So for example, if market rates are 5%, we can cut our rate by 3 percentage points. So the bank is actually paying only 2% on our deposit, and then that 3% haircut or rate reduction can be extended to the borrower. The borrower rate there at the bottom half of page 13 is determined by the bank, what their market rate is for this type of borrower, looking at their credit. And then the haircut that they apply is 30%. So the borrower is only paying 70% of what they normally would pay if they weren't involved in the MOBUX program. As I mentioned earlier, these are deposits that the Treasurer's Office makes at banks throughout the state. There really isn't any credit risk because it's really separate. We have the STO or the Treasurer's Office deposit at the bank, and then the bank, in theory, uses those funds as a source of capital to loan money out to borrowers that qualify within our program. Our money is held in the CD form of deposit, and it is all collateralized. So that's why I consider this type of program not to have any credit risk. If there is any issue with the borrower and for some reason or another that they no longer qualify, we can pull our deposit from the bank. So we have that flexibility there, that protection there. I mean, we're working with taxpayers' money throughout the state. So we have that level of protection to be able to pull our deposits if somebody doesn't qualify or something happens with the bank. We do our own due diligence of the borrower, but we also look at the bank's creditworthiness. The next few pages really just talks about documents that we require. Starting on page 15, looks at the documents that are required from the borrower to go through our internal due diligence process. I won't go into a lot of detail there, but you can see that it's a pretty thorough due diligence process that we incorporate here before we make a deposit at the banks. So that's my high-level overview of the presentation. I'm willing to kind of address some questions now or down the road, depending on what the committee would like to do. We can go back to any slides that I kind of glanced over and didn't provide a good level of understanding or good level of detail that you'd like to drill into more. So I'll kind of hand this back over to you all and let you take it from there.
Hey, David, thank you so much for that. We're actually going to do questions for you now so you can go about your day. I know you're a busy guy. Committee, do we have any questions for David, Representative Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I serve on the special committee that has looked over this, and I was excited to hear your testimony. Going alongside the due diligence, I assume you do at the beginning, is there any audits or continuum maintenance to make sure that those loans are being used as they were applied for?
Yes, and when we make a deposit with a bank or qualify a borrower, they are for a 5-year commitment. They can, and then, so it's a 5-year commitment, and there's an annual renewal. And depending on what the bank and the borrower wants to do, we can do a 1-year fixed rate, a 5-year fixed rate. But either way, it's for a 5-year commitment with an annual renewal. And the renewal process occurs here internally, that we reevaluate that borrower just to make sure that they continue to qualify. So before we kind of roll the funds for another year, we do I would say it's a shorter approval process than the original due diligence, but we do take a second look every year or another look every year. Does that answer your question? I want to make sure
Yes, that does. I just have a follow-up with that.
Yeah.
Through the, due diligence part, is there a report that you all put out to show that how the linked deposits have benefited the state through the different programs that you offer it for?
there is there's a few difficulties here, and I struggle with this personally, of trying to understand or quantify the return on investment. And maybe that's where you're getting how it stimulates the economies throughout the state, the local economies, how it stimulates the statewide economy, because I think it's very difficult. We can quantify what the initial investment is by the treasurer's office or by the state, because that's the rate reduction that we are offering the bank in exchange for extending the funds to a borrower at a below market rate. But then how those dollars are used or the economic impact on the local economies is very difficult to quantify.
Great.
I mean, we can see whether they're using it for feed or using it for seed or hiring another employee or two, but beyond that I think it gets a little fuzzy, fortunately.
No, that makes sense. I just wondered if you had any success stories or personal testimonies of how, this has impacted, whether that's small business or local farm operations. So thank you for answering my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Roser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. I have a question on page or slide 15. You have immigration documents listed on there, and so I was curious, looking on your website and everything at your application process and ineligible borrowers and your borrower certification, do you have to be a citizen to be a part of this program?
No, you do not need to be a citizen, but you need to be a legal resident.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Committee, any further questions for David? Seeing none. David, thank you so much, sir, for that overview. I'm sure in the coming months, we'll be in contact a little more. I know as Alex, the representative with the KBA said, we're going to request an interim committee, and we may ask that perhaps we could get this presentation in front of the interim committee as well, if that works for you guys.
Yeah, just let us know how we can continue to assist.
I appreciate that. Jayhawks and Tigers working together. Look at that.
Yes.
All right,
Hear
thank you
that.
thank you so much, David, and we'll definitely be in touch, sir. Thank you.
Sounds good. Have a good week, everyone.
You too. Up next, we have Shauna Wake, Director of Financial Services for the Treasurer's Office. Shauna, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I have a presentation. If they're ready for that, as soon as it gets up, I'll get started. Last time I talked to you all about linked deposits, I gave you a lot of numbers and not a lot of contextual information. So I'm hoping to revert that this time and give you just a little bit more of high-level information. So we're talking today about the structure of the linked deposits in the state of Kansas. The presentation from Missouri was very helpful. A lot of our programs have similarity, or a lot of the facets of the programs are similar between the two programs. Okay. So Kansas linked deposits are funded by state idle funds. And then that one was just a stopover. You keep going. So what are state funds? Let's start with that. The cash is deposited by state agencies, and by cash, I mean ACHs, wires, all of that good stuff. Those funds include the basic SGF transactions, your tax revenue, your investment earnings, unclaimed property deposits, and the balance in your budget stabilization fund. Your special revenue funds, which are agency fee funds and operating expense funds. Then we have federal funds and trust funds, which is money that we're holding for other entities. So within the state treasury, all of that money becomes the state idle pool of funds. And it goes into various places. The majority of it is invested with the Pooled Money Investment Board. The treasurer sits on the board and is very active in those conversations. The treasurer's unclaimed property portfolio is a bucket of money for unclaimed property that's sent off to CAPERS for investment, and then we have some cash on deposit with US Bank. That amount is generally minimal to maximize our investment returns. I will note that in the state of Kansas, there are several legislative mandated investments for the state of Kansas. The language states that those mandates cannot exceed 10% of the portfolio or 140 million, whichever one is greater. And there's a list of what those different things are. So we have our city utility loans. That balance is ever decreasing. It started off at 77 million. We're about to 31 million right now. And that amount will never go back up unless you all tell us to. There are local taxing district loans, which are loans that the PMIB issues to cities and counties that have property tax issues that they are solving. And then we have our 5 linked deposit loan programs there. So the maximum allowed number here is incorrect. It should be $202 million. And then I'll note that there is no direct limit on the KDOL loan. It's just within that 10% or 140 million. So in the event of a problem there, that could go up to the full balance remaining. So the remaining idle funds are invested in U.S. obligations, commercial paper, municipal bonds, all of that. And what happens to the money that's not used in the idle fund? Alex touched on this a little bit, or in the link deposit program, sorry. The funds are put to work in other investments is the short answer. So you see the pie chart on the left is what the investment balances were on March 5th. And the investment on the right is just what it would look like if your link deposit programs were maxed out. So still the same amount of money invested, just in different mixes. And then when we're talking about how much we can spend on link deposits and other legislative mandated loans, we want to look at liquidity and yield for the state of Kansas for a long period of time. So some of those loans can go 5 years. I went ahead and went back 10 years, and our portfolio balance was $2.6 billion at that time. So if you looked at the link deposits that we have active right now, with that loan balance, we're looking at a much larger percent of the total portfolio than we would be today. If we looked at today's limit of loans with that portfolio balance, we're looking at about 10.5% of possible loans with that balance. Some frequently asked questions that we get are, what happens if the borrower defaults on the loan? Much like Missouri, the bank holds that liability. All of those deposits are collateralized in our office, and so we lean back on that if the bank fails to repay that certificate of deposit. The certificate of deposit is secured by the lending institution via collateral, which we price in our office weekly, so we're keeping up on that. The balance of the deposit plus any interest accrued to that date is what is collateralized, so there's no risk to the state, much like Missouri. One thing that is different here is the Treasurer's Office and PMIB, we don't review the creditworthiness of the borrower. That's completely on the bank, the lending institution. They're supposed to use their existing internal processes to determine that creditworthiness and eligibility for the program. We do have the lending institution submit a certification to our office, which certifies that the borrower is meeting the requirements of the program and the borrower is signing off on that and getting it notarized. We do an annual verification of that CD balance and the loan balance to make sure that when the loan goes down, the CD also goes down at the same rate. And we do a biannual borrower certification whereby the borrower certifies to our office that they continue to meet the requirements of the program. The most common question that we get, and I know that we're kind of repeating this a lot today, but the unused funds in those link deposits are not sitting dormant in an account somewhere. They are being invested in other investments for the state of Kansas. And can the funds that are allowed for those link deposit programs be used for other purposes? At the discretion of you all. You all get to tell us what we're doing with those. They may be changed and diverted into other investments. Alternative uses of those state idle pool should consider the liquidity and yield for the state of Kansas and our agencies. And alternative uses must be repayable to the state of Kansas so that we can continue that liquidity. And if it's not subject to repayment, an alternative source of funds needs to be identified for those. Finally, I just have a chart. You can see the utilization of the ag loan program over time. There was a sharp decrease around 2011, 2012, which is a lot of market, but we also put a floor on those rates at that time. And then our economic recovery linked deposit loan program has only been there for a few years now, but you can see that we've got similar usage to the ag loan program in that one. The utilization is still pretty low there for the full amount. And then you also have a list of just what the interest earned has been for the state of Kansas on these funds, what the rate history is, so you can look back in time, and what the utilization is. So if anybody has any questions about that or about my presentation, I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Shauna. We'll go ahead and do questions for you now as well, committee. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony. Okay, so I just have a question with the biannual review. You talked about the initial process, working with the lender, making sure that the borrower meets the approval process. But then for the biannual review, is that directly with the state treasurer's office with the borrower, or is the lender involved in that process as well?
The lender is involved in that process. So we go through the lender, we tell them that we need to see recertification on these loans, and then they come back to us within a month.
Okay, great. And then you kind of touched on this, and I probably didn't quite understand, but whenever, say, during those biennial reviews, you notice maybe they're not meeting the qualifications or haven't used the funds as intended, is there a clawback, or do you pool the loan? How does that process work?
So in that event, we would pull the deposit with the bank. The loan is then between the bank and the borrower, what they do with it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions for Shauna? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, up next, we're going to have Mark Toom. I know he wanted to say a few words in support of this. Mark, welcome to the committee, sir.
There, can you hear me now? It's blue. There we go. I think I got it. All right, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much for allowing me to provide some comments today on this. My name is Mark Toom. I'm the Vice President of Governmental Affairs with the Kansas Association of Realtors. We're here in support of the modernization of this program, and I think you're going to probably hear from us more when you start talking about the applications that will be layered in on this. In particular, we're talking about the Kansas Housing Loan Deposit Program, and like Alex said earlier, that hasn't been used in more than 10 years. And I think by reforming this program, I think there are a number of uses that could be used in the area of housing. I think that Alex mentioned the SHIP program. I think that's one that is being utilized. Right now it's the CHIP program that the city of Pittsburgh is using. That's that 10% developer part of the equation. And what we've seen with housing is that it's a math problem. And that's also on the developer side. That's also a math problem that cities face, bringing the infrastructure in to bring about the needed construction. And I think one of the ideas that we have been proposing is something that's tied to RHID, which is the Reinvestment Housing Incentive Districts. Used to be the Rural Housing Incentive Districts. But that is a program that does have a payback. So it fits nicely in with programs like this because it has a source to pay back a revolving fund type of an investment. But we see housing as a big math problem right now with lumber, labor, regulations, interest rates. There are a few programs I think that the state can do to help with that math problem, and that's these linked deposit programs to bring some of that needed investment to rural Kansas. So happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Committee, does anybody have any questions for Mark? Seeing none, thank you so much, Mark. We also have written testimony and support from Emily Beam with Kansas Credit Union Association. I see Kel is in. He's probably watching something. I don't know what he would be watching, but Kel, did you want to provide any comments? No, okay. And something about this, unlike other public funds, credit unions are a part of the linked deposit program. So that's why they're in support of this legislation as well. Alex, do you want to finish this off with any closing remarks on this?
Yeah, no, I'll just touch on, appreciate Mark's comments on the housing piece. And I know there's been a lot of talk on housing in general. And the reason why we think this one is a really good path is it is the payback. It's not just a one-time spend or a grant or a credit. So having some sort of program like that to supplement, because it's going to, for instance, for that SHIP program, there's going to be a loan already made on that. And besides that money going to that program. So once again, a lot of public-private partnerships that we see a lot of benefit to. And I'm frankly, me personally, so this has been a program I've been looking at since I've been at the KBA for 7 years. And it's just always bothered me that, why aren't these working? So I'm motivated and looking forward to working with you all to get these programs to work.
Okay. I believe we stand for questions real quick, Alex. Representative Neely.
Of course.
Okay, the number one reason that I hear that these programs don't get used is the sophistication of the application, usually. And a lot of times such entities can't afford to hire a grant writer or a full-time CPA. What about, I mean, I would like to see some of the funds used in the ability for the people to be able to apply for them. You know, you say they're not being used. I think a lot of that stems from the fact that the inability or just the flat problem of trying to figure out and come up with the astronomical amount of information and things that are needed in order to accomplish it.
So I can answer that in about 3 different ways. You know, if it's a customer working with their bank, their individual bank, so they are working with their person that has the expertise there. But you're exactly right on the complexity of things. There needs to be a significant amount of education done on this, and it's the same thing as HB 2152 of us and the league and the counties and the treasurer all working together to do joint education on it, and that's the only way it's going to work. It's the same thing here on the complexity side. And so I lost my train of thought there. I've got a lot of things going there, Representative, but I think education will go a long way here.
Well, and what I'm suggesting is that if necessary, some of the funds be dedicated and everything when we design the bill in accomplishing such a feat, that we dedicate individuals or whatever it's needed to do that. Because if we're leaving the funds sitting there and they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, let's get somebody in there to facilitate and make sure that they are.
I have no doubt in the staff and the training that Treasurer Johnson and his team here. I have no doubt that they have that ability too. But this is where that public-private partnership piece comes into it. I think they have the staff on this. It's just a lot of people don't know about them, unfortunately, too. And my last comment, though, you know, regarding there is a little bit of paperwork and you know, red tape on the bank side. You saw all the documentation that has to be filled out. I'll tell you one thing that's going to really help with this is the passage of HB 2152, the creation of that centralized, you know, collateral pool, single bank pool, where now that bank will be able to utilize that program as well as pulling down these funds too. So it'll make it easier for them on that front too.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Alex, for bringing this. I think to kind of go off of Representative Neely's point, from a small business perspective, it is hard to navigate these different programs that are available to us. And I do recognize the value as a small business owner who banks with a small bank in Kansas, the important relationship there is needed in between a bank and their business, or their business and the bank. So when it comes to these programs and with it having to be facilitated through the lender, will there be additional help through, you know, banks to help educate on that piece and help the borrower get through the process with the lender?
So from the KBA perspective, I mean, we provide training. I mean, we represent 99% of the banks headquartered in Kansas. There's only 2 that are not, and then we represent, you know, 50% of the ones out of state that are doing business here. We do 11 major conferences a year at the KBA. We provide training from the teller all the way to the board director. So for us, and if successful in getting the implementation of changes here, I would absolutely recommend our leadership team and our folks to do dedicated conference, dedicated training from our membership. And we'd be willing to partner with any other organization to do that side of things.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Roser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's kind of a compliment, but also a question. So back in 2020, in March of 2020, we approved, or there was a national emergency, and we started the PPP program, and we started lending that out 3 weeks later. And a huge compliment to the KBA, because that was impossible to navigate from a lender standpoint, but the KBA came through for us and they made that happen. So my question would be, would the KBA be willing to do something that they did similar with the PPP program, where we were able to send out informational stuff to every commercial account holder at the bank that I worked at that will remain unnamed? Would that be something that we could coordinate that would maybe help alleviate some of these training questions and curb some of that conversation?
I can absolutely stand in confidence to say yes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, do we have any further questions for Alex? Seeing none, thank you so much, Alex. And as I said, will be a continuing discussion, and I do intend on requesting an interim committee on this from leadership so we can study it again and refine the details and have some legislation next year that we're ready to pass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, committee, we have one last piece of business today. On March 6th, you should have got the email of the the minutes from March 3rd and March 5th. Is there any corrections, adjustments, or discussion on those minutes? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion. Vice Chair Steens.
Move to approve.
Need a second? Second by Representative Neely. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Representative Shu voted in the affirmative. All right. All right, committee. So while we have 2 committee meetings left, I do not intend on this meeting. Any of these meetings, I have no further business unless something comes up. So they will be listed on call of the chair on the agenda, but as at this point, I do not see a reason for us to meet any further. So I want to take this time to first thank our staff that really helped us out this year. Nicole, David, Mike, Jason, Rich, and Cole. They all helped out. Great job. As we know, this place does not run without our staff. I also want to thank my Vice Chair Steens, stepped up to the plate this year. I think it was a lot early on, but she handled it well, is doing a great job learning the process. I also want to thank my ranking member, Representative Shu. Again, this is our 5th year working together on this committee in some capacity, and I always appreciate your knowledge and your hard work, and you're willing to work together and to compromise. So I appreciate that. And I also want to thank every one of you committee members. This is a very complex committee. We handle a lot of heavy legislation. Not so much this year, but my goal is always to bring people together and work towards consensus, compromise. I think everything we passed out this year was bipartisan. I think it might have been unanimous too. It hasn't always been the case in years past. We've always had a piece of legislation or two where we butt heads a little bit, but we at least make the attempt to work together. So I want to thank you all for that. And I also want to point out that as far as myself and Representative Shu's research goes, this committee this year passed out the first capers enhancement where we're actually giving something extra or improving capers since I believe, was it 93? Is that what we were told? So that's a pretty big deal. And that's something that we came out and we set out to do this year is how do we fix our capers program? And we took that first step this year in a unanimous bipartisan fashion in this committee. So I want to thank the committee for that as well. And without any further comments, we are adjourned. All right.